thinking a lot about narratives and the narratives that we live by. And I have so many different things I've written down that I want to talk about. And it seems every time I turn this on to begin speaking, I'm kind of at a loss for words or overwhelmed by the things that I want to say. But to keep it simple, um, I want to talk about narratives that we live by. And all of us have narratives that we live by. And in the last maybe 8 or 9 months, we're living by a narrative that's been imposed upon us. Um, some people have unquestioningly accepted the narrative, and some people have not and have just questioned rigorously the narrative and are seeking to understand why. Now, back to the general issue of narratives. We human beings are unique animals, mammals, in the sense that not only do we have opposable thumbs and we can make, we can draw, paint, write, we can play instruments. We have these incredible brains and minds that have no limits, imagination wise. We have the sciences, we have the maths, we have religion, philosophy, all of that. We're creators by nature, and we kind of can't help ourselves. And I believe that each one of us is born with a purpose and a talent, and we're here to serve humanity and all of life. Now, there are narratives that we live by that either expand our consciousness and expand our ability to do things, and then there are narratives that are extremely limiting. And give an example, something that I've been observing over the past several months especially, but over the past several years there's been this narrative, the Black Lives Matter narrative. And please excuse me if I offend anybody. I'm not trying to offend anybody at all. But the Black Lives narrative is a narrative of victimhood, right? And I see, especially after the lockdowns, the narrative is increasing and increasing. And this is what it says. Black people are at the mercy or at the receiving end of systemic racism. And all of our heroes now are the martyrs who've been killed at the hands of white people. And I did a video before where I was talking about this, about how there's this like cognitive dissonance where if a black person is killed by a white person, it's as if they've been, touched by a god. And then all of a sudden the status in society just, shoots to the top. Whereas when a black person is killed by another black person, nobody cares really. Um, and I love history. I absolutely love history, and I've been studying history of black people in the United States and studying the history of, say, particular specifically Basotho people. And I see that there is this big difference between how black African American history and African history, right, from an African perspective. And they've been diverging, especially in the past 8 months. Um, to be more specific, and my African brothers and sisters, correct me if I'm wrong, from an African perspective, whatever your culture is, the narrative is the celebration of kings, of heroes, and healers for the most part. You've got um, from the, just saying in general, right? It's the history of men and women who have done just amazing things and overcome these insurmountable odds. And they're kings and they're queens and they're warriors and they're just regular people who did incredible things to change the whole society, and they're celebrated and they're revered. But the the narrative is one of triumph, and the narrative is one of celebration, and the narrative is one of possibility. And I believe that up until recent times, maybe the past few decades in the United States, there's that similar narrative of Black American history. Because if you were to really take a deep dive into Black American history, there are stories of, you know, people who built, you know, institutions. They built schools and institutions and hospitals and orphanages